Welcome to the Noble Ape Podcast, Ape Reality. I'm Tom Barbalet, and hot on the heels of the last podcast on ApeScript, I thought I'd record a podcast on Noble Warfare. What is Noble Warfare? Where did I get the idea from? What's the background to this development? What does it do? What should it do in the future? This podcast primarily comes out of a discussion I had with Riddle P and Pedro and I on Sunday, of which you've heard just a small snippet of the audio component thanks to my inability to use audio software, or perhaps lack of space on my hard disk, or all of the above. Noble Warfare was originally developed by me in, I think, 93, 94. I did a lot of talking about it, and it was inspired by Time Commanders on the BBC. Actually, yeah, I think it was on the BBC. So long ago since I saw Time Commanders. But I created a digital version of the inspirational article that gave some background to what Time Commanders was, and basically it was about taking regular people off the streets and making them into Roman generals, typically, or other similar kinds of generals. And, you know, the ladies' tennis club and things like that basically couldn't use archers effectively. At the same time, I was going through a kind of personal renaissance in wargaming. Although I don't play wargames, I certainly collected a lot of miniatures, and I love reading wargaming rules, and the history components to it fascinate me, and I read a lot of background history as well. So the whole idea of kind of tabletop gaming was relatively thick in my head, as you can see in my log updates on Barbalet's log, which I religiously updated over this period. Again, not in the Richard Dawkins deprecating sense. Noble Warfare came out of that, and it was really through a need to develop an open source, large-scale combat simulation. And I do say as an aside that there was something to do with the genetic components or genetic effects of warfare that also impassioned me about this, although at the time really my primary interest was to get something that looked like Total War. Ironically, and this is really critical, I started developing Noble Warfare prior to ever acquiring Total War. Probably about 3 months into the development, I did buy Medieval Total War, and it did change my perspective. I thought the interface was interesting but poor, and the use of block graphics in particular I thought would be relatively easy to mirror. And if you see this through the Noble Warfare site and you download the source code, it contains a block avatar editor, which I wrote at the same time. Noble Warfare as it currently is really, really poor. It starts with a Noble Ape file format, which you fill with various characteristics of abstract units. Take, for example, archers, because I do like to talk about bows and arrows. You then create the abstract archer, which is an individual archer, and you then create a whole unit of these things, and these are separate ape file format structures, Noble Ape file format structures, whatever you want to call them. But they are in the same file, and you reference them numerically. So you create a wide variety of different unit types in the abstract instance, and then you then create the units as they're organised. There's ideas of size, melee attack, missile attack, all this is available in the documentation online. But what you end up with is a fighting force made up of a number of different units, some neatly ordered. I don't think there's a skirmish class of units yet, but that's definitely something that will be added in the near future. You get all these components together, you get a similar army against you, and then they do battle. And the logic for doing battle is relatively hardwired and not particularly brilliant currently, hence the very great need for adding ApeScript to this in the near future, so all the combatants' moves will actually be scripted and thus change considerably more dynamically. But there are various issues with regards to use of ranged weapons, use of melee weapons, and how these things interact. And per Noble Ape simulation style, the combatants are currently represented as dots. It's currently a monochrome. It was originally developed in colour, but basically I went through... There was an interface where you could click on the various units and organise them and move them around and do things kind of into battle and regroup them and all this kind of stuff. But it was very heavily based on the Mac API in terms of clicking and dragging and finding regions and things like that, and it didn't translate very well to Windows. So I pulled all of that and just made it the current format, which is based on a file. So you just put in the file and you let things do battle, and you put in the file and you let things do battle. And that's the way it operates. It's kind of emulated reality. There are board game ideas. There is an idea of a board that you're actually moving things on in some regard. There's a quantization of space, which I use for the individual combatants. But aside from that, it is still relatively a clean slate. I'm hoping that Riddle P will rewrite Noble Warfare considerably, maybe even add a graphics interface to it. I certainly had the idea of hills and valleys and landscape and all these kind of beautiful things when I originally developed it, line of sight being very critical, and I'd like to see that kind of carried forward in the next version of Noble Warfare. As I've mentioned in previous podcasts, Noble Warfare is very passionately followed by a group that have subscribed to the Noble Warfare mailing list, which I think outnumbers the Noble Ape mail out, but I am covering old ground. So that's Noble Warfare in a nutshell. A number of different components, all fundamentally compatible with the Noble Ape simulation in the coding ideas, but still a bit disjoined in terms of the final implementation. Maybe in the future they will all become one. But in the interim, the source code is available on a separate site, which I'll put in the show notes, noblewarfare.com. And it will be very interesting times in the near future as Riddle P takes it on and does something with it. If you're interested in more information on Noble Warfare, please get in contact with me, tom@nobleape.com. Thank you for tuning into this podcast, and look forward to you tuning into the next podcast.